Please welcome to the stage Senior Director, Head of Global Specialists, Jen Mingo.
Hello. My name is Jen Mingo, and I head up our Global Specialist organization here at Slack. And our specialists create and implement success strategies at our largest and most complex customers. And we focus on 4 different areas. We have experience specialists focused on creating the best experience for your end user. We have learning specialists who create a wide variety of learning opportunities depending on your end user needs. We have a technical group that focuses on making sure your implementation can scale as you grow. And then we have delivery excellence leaders that focus on creating an agile, collaborative, and engaging process. This has given us a unique perspective on what it takes to launch Slack at scale. It also has shown us that there are a variety of roles an admin can play, from setting the vision and creating the roadmap to maintaining and configuring your Slack implementation. No matter what role you play, we want to thank you for helping us make Slack a success at your organization. Today, you're going to hear from your peers about the key elements required to make Slack successful and have the ability to scale to thousands of users. Tomorrow, in part 2, we'll focus on the features in Slack that can help you scale your implementation. How many of you here are planning a Slack rollout? All right. How many are in the middle? And how many are revisiting your Slack implementation? So we have a wide range of people here, and I think this session is going to be great for you no matter what role you play. So first, we want to go through and talk about the key elements that the panel will be discussing today. From an organization standpoint, it's really important that you have a vision. When you're setting out on a journey, you want to know where you're going and why you're going there. It's important to have executive sponsors. You want to make sure that your executives are on board and that your end users see their engagement and how they're believing in the platform and that it's being rolled out on their behalf. And you want to be able to measure success, and not just success for the overall deployment, but success for the end user, success for the line of business, and success for the organization. Then from an end user standpoint, you want to be able to focus on an optimized experience. And you also want to enable that experience, because Slack is going to be the new front door to their day, and you want to make sure that when they're there, they know how to use it, and they use it well. So with that, I will turn it over to Gina, who is a senior success leader here at Slack, and Freya and Steve for the panel. You're welcome.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Jacobson, and as Jen mentioned, I head up one of our customer success teams here at Slack. I'm really thrilled to be with you guys here today, and I'm super excited to talk to 2 of our customers. Let's start with some quick introductions. Freya, what about you?
So hi, everybody. I'm Freya Hurwitz, and I head up product for our IT operations and technology group at TripAdvisor. And one of the things that falls under our remit is collaboration, so Slack is under me.
Great. And Steve?
Sure, and my name's Steve Damadeo. I'm the Senior IT Manager in charge of productivity tools for Boston Consulting Group. So my team covers everything from Office, Exchange, our messaging and project management tools. So a lot of the how do we enable people how to collaborate effectively, and Slack falls into that product portfolio for our team as well.
Fantastic. A quick note for everyone in the audience. We're going to walk through 5 best practices. We'll have some slides up behind me here, so feel free to take pictures if you'd like. You can walk away with a nice little workbook of best practices. So let's dive in. The first one is, and I know Jen just mentioned this, we also heard Serena mention this, but the importance of having a vision statement up front as you roll out a tool like Slack. So I'm curious, Steve, what kind of thought have you put into rolling out a vision?
Yep, so that's a really important point, and I'm glad that Serena had mentioned it as well as kind of the starting point, because a lot of it sounds nice and flowery on the surface, but it's really fundamental to your ability to be successful. And so our approach on it with our organization was to design it very much collaboratively. It had to include some top-down components. It had to include some bottom-up components about what was the problem that we were looking to solve, how are we trying to enable our people to best be successful, and what was our desired result? How could we, use and create tools that would help support that? How to create a culture of collaboration that gets people working better together.
Great. And I know you guys have a lot of remote workers. Did that factor into your vision as well?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things with our organization is that 70% of our people are on the road 80% of the time. So the ability to collaborate effectively, regardless of time, space, distance, is not a nice to have. It's table stakes for our organization. If we do it well, we're successful. If we do it poorly, everything falls apart behind it. And so that was very much a component of it in terms of how do we build it. And not only how does it work in offices, how does it work when we're working together with some of our customers, how does it work on planes, trains, and automobiles, how do we get those types of people to do it? And that was really one of the biggest drivers for it. And also one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, and I think from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you articulated the value for your employees. What I like is you tied it to a business goal. And I think when you're setting a vision, it's really important to make sure the employee understands why they're going to start using Slack, but really see how it helps ladder up to that company's goals. How did you guys think about vision? Because I know you started in a little bit of a different way than Steve.
Yeah, so we actually started a pilot, and before we did the pilot, we looked at who was going to be using it and did a survey of the employees in a variety of functions across the organization to understand what their needs were and what their requirements were. So definitely a bottoms-up approach to understand what we were looking for globally from collaboration. We also have a huge distributed team, so we wanted to make sure that everybody's needs from the remote employee to the office employee were met.
Great. And how did you both communicate that vision once you had it out to your employees?
Sure. So for obviously talking about the idea of communication and collaboration being key, we tried to get people where they were working as many different ways as possible. There were top-down messages that went out from our executive leadership saying, hey, here's what we have. Here's what we're looking to do to empower people to be more collaborative and more effective. So there was that component of it. There was also a big peer component of it as well. And that was kind of one of the interesting things for us is that before we decided to centrally engage, we had about 8,000 people using it organically on their own anyway, which poses a bit of a challenge from an IT management perspective. But it meant that we had a lot of built-in champions and desire for it that we could tap into to draw upon that. I think that's the second part. And then the third part of it as well is, and I don't know if one of my colleagues who does this is in the audience right now, but we have a team of digital coaches that we had helped establish that work together with our client teams in order to establish how do you work? What are you looking to accomplish? How can we best help you succeed in that? So it was a combination of education on the tools as well as helping to communicate the vision of what that future workplace could look like for people. So we took a lot of different approaches to it, and that's proven to be very successful so far from what we've gotten feedback-wise.
Absolutely. And I think it sounds like you deliver that message at multiple layers throughout the organization, which is fantastic.
All day, every day.
I will say sometimes when I talk to people about setting a vision for Slack, I get a little bit of the deer in headlights, and it can be a big thing to think about chewing off. So here's a couple of easy questions I think that are really helpful to start that conversation. And the other thing I'll say is it's never too late to come up with a vision. So even if you've already got people on Slack, it's a great time to sit back and kind of revisit why did you roll it out. So first asking why will Slack be valuable to your employees and how will it help push forward those business goals, but also what are the benefits if they get in their day-to-day job when they start adopting the tool. And I think you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but defining that what's in it for me can go a long way.
Yeah.
I think our next area of conversation is leveraging executive sponsorship, and this can really help with vision as well. So making sure that you've got executive sponsors who are influential in your organization to help promote and endorse the tool. And we like to encourage them to take it a step forward, and no offense to any business leaders in the room, but sometimes they take a little convincing to actually go in and start using the product. Can you talk a little bit about how executives receive Slack and how you got them to endorse and sponsor Slack?
Yep, that's a good point. And first of all, I also want to preface that statement by the fact that to convince executives, part of it is knowing who people listen to and being able to tap into the right channels and information for that. And I might be the one sitting up here right now talking about what our journey was, but I had a lot of help of a lot of very, very good people around us who helped do this. And so we establish it really from a service ownership perspective. And it's this idea of, here's where we are now, here's where we want to be, and how can we quantify what that business value looks like? Does it affect email? Does it affect meetings? Does it help people arrive at decisions faster? Does it help people build consensus towards something faster? Does it help us get access to information to make informed decisions faster? And so those are really some of the angles that we took at that. And so some of it, like I said, was kind of organic and bringing in the champions who were there as well. The good thing is that our leadership is very, very well set on the importance of building collaboration and a good communications environment that empowers it. So we didn't have to do too much convincing on is it the right thing to do? It was more just a question of how do we best want to go about it. And our organization is federated. And so this is always kind of an interesting thing as well, is that we basically have 1,200 CEOs. So as you can imagine, think the UN Security Council, but everybody has veto power. Like that's the kind of conversation and things that we're working on and building that up. So you find those people within your organization, you find those people at that level who can do it, and then it becomes much more of a peer conversation. It was fascinating to see how some of those things came about, but it ended up really putting us in a position where we felt we could succeed.
Any tips for getting them to buy in?
Yeah. Probably too many to fit into the time of this one, but only because we've learned some lessons the right way, we learned some lessons the hard way, like with everybody on this. I think some of the key activities to look at there is, one, don't be afraid to have the conversation. That's really the biggest thing, is especially we come to it from, and I know I'm talking primarily to an IT audience here, given this track, but a lot of times we come to it from an IT perspective. And you got to remember, if you treat Slack and your communications and collaborations initiatives as an IT project, it's going to fail. There's no such thing as an IT project. It's a business project with IT involvement, which means that sometimes the best thing that we can do is put the right people in the room and be quiet. And so really it's about establishing who are those people and doing that, and then letting them take that conversation forward. So really some of the best things we did was knowing when to listen.
Yep. And what about the executives over at TripAdvisor?
So we actually have a business unit structure. So I actually worked with each of the different business units, as well as the heads of some of the non-business unit teams like finance and legal, to really explain to them what was in it for them and why they'd want to adopt it. We were actually in a slightly different position because we were moving from an existing collaboration tool. So some of the convincing was more around the cost of Slack and why we should switch versus the need for collaboration, which certainly product and engineering well understood and we're all on board with. So I actually had to go and walk through and explain to the people who hadn't adopted our previous tool why they'd want to start using the tool. We had Skype, we had all versions of Instant Messenger all over the company, and it was really hard to find people, and that was a common complaint across the board. So being able to explain that using Slack was going to really bring everybody together was a huge benefit for our business unit leaders.
Great. So some of our suggested activities, if you're looking to get executives involved in Slack, I'm curious if you guys did any of these, but first, obviously, the more that they can endorse it publicly, so whether that's in a town hall or, of course, we love a welcome post in Slack. If an executive can post that, people can reference it. And then Ask Me Anything sessions. Have either of you guys ran those in your companies?
One of our business units has actually run an executive AMA on it. We haven't done it at full scale just yet, but it is something that has been helpful. It creates a sense of accessibility. Yep. And I think that's really a big part of it, is that, and especially as an organization gets larger and larger and larger, you go through this metamorphosis from, hey, I know the person who can do this, over to now I have to navigate process and change. And it creates sometimes barriers to adoption for tool sets, for one thing, but also cultural barriers, as if suddenly, the C-suite is not available. And I think that's something that as organizations grow, that's a bit of a challenge, is how do you maintain what got you there as a smaller organization while still expanding to do it. And I know there's been some stories of that with Slack as well. But this has been something that we've done small pieces with. But I imagine there probably will be some of that expanding out as we go forward. But I can't say for certain just yet.
It's something that I've actually seen spread quite quickly amongst a lot of our customers. So the idea of doing an Ask Me Anything session or an AMA in Slack, we at Slack do that, and we have a channel actually that people can ask questions in, and different executives around our business can come in and answer those as the questions arise. And I think you hit it on the head where it offers a level of accessibility to executives for employees that there's really not another platform who can do that the same way that Slack can, which is great. The third one is a fun one that we threw up here, so I think about how you might fit this into your own company culture, but we created a Where's the Boss channel. And Stuart's traveling all around the globe, and so he's talking to customers, he's going to conferences, and this channel is a great way for people to post pictures and updates of where he is, and it really feeds into that accessibility, so making the company feel connected to him, and that's been quite meaningful as we've scaled over time. And you mentioned a little bit, Freya, about how when you get this buy-in from executives, one of the things they want to talk about is the value of Slack. And so that brings us to how do you measure success? And so we spend a lot of time in the customer success organization speaking with customers around how do you articulate that value? And I think obviously you can do that quantitatively. So looking at things like usage metrics and adoption metrics. I particularly find the qualitative things very interesting, though. So measuring things like employee sentiment, productivity enhancements, maybe a little bit harder to capture in data. And so I've talked to both of you about this, but when I go to customers and I walk the floors of their business, I get a lot of those aha moments. And they usually sound something like, I can't believe that Slack was able to help with X problem. Or, it used to take me 3 weeks to do this, and now that I have Slack, it takes me 1 week to do that. And I think coupling those kind of value stories with your quantitative metrics gives a great holistic view of the value the tool is driving. And I know you did a pretty robust assessment of Slack.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about how you thought about that and why you did it?
Sure. So TripAdvisor is a very data-driven organization. Everything we do, we look at the data. Every test we run on the website, everything is based on data. So clearly our Slack implementation was no different. And we did a baseline survey before we rolled out Slack to our broad audience to figure out how long does it take people to find information, how long does it take to triage problems, how long does it take to get IT help, things like that, things that would impact the employees' everyday life. And so we had this baseline set of numbers, and then about 3 months after our Slack launch, we actually ran it again. And so we could see that there was a meaningful difference in all of those numbers in terms of how long it takes people to get information, but also a meaningful difference from our remote employees as far as how connected they felt to their teams. There was a huge drop in tickets for our office experience team because instead of getting 15 tickets saying, there's no toilet paper in the men's bathroom, they got one Slack message and they could respond in channel and say, okay, we're on it, and just take care of it. So there was a huge drop in tickets there. We also had our IT team create a help bot, so it goes right into our Jira service desk, so it made it a lot easier for our IT support to reach out to people immediately after they create a ticket instead of trying to find them via email or the delays that that would take. So time to solve problems also went down.
That's great. And I know sometimes when I talk to organizations, some are super friendly towards surveys, some are a little bit more hesitant. Did you come across any pushback or consideration when it came to launching the survey to your employees?
So we had no problem doing the survey, and everyone was pretty responsive to it. But I also went around and got anecdotal evidence from people. People would stop me in the elevator. I became like the Slack person at the company, and they'd stop me and say, "I love how Slack has helped with this," or "Thank you for bringing Slack. This is the best launch we've ever done."
We'll take it.
Well, part of it was, it's really sort of like Steve said, with it being a business problem to solve with IT involvement. This was the first IT rollout that we ever did with that approach, where we looked at it from a business perspective and we didn't look at it from an IT perspective. And it really made a huge difference in our launch.
Any tweaks that you guys made as a result of the survey? Or surveys at this point?
I think, the tweaks were more around the admin controls and what we let people do. So when we first launched, we had it pretty well locked down, so people couldn't do a whole lot. And then there are certain things we actually had wide open that we ended up locking down. So things like the Slack bot responses got a little out of hand when people started putting things in, and so we turned that off, but we also opened up the ability for managers to create their own user groups, for example, so they could set their default channels for people.
That's great. And I know that you guys have had a big footprint, Steve. Are you guys thinking about measuring success as you launch to more and more users?
It's definitely something that we have to look at. We actually just completed our global rollout, so we're at about 22,000 plus people now last week.
Yep.
So we're still very
big
much
moment.
Yeah, we're very much early in the what does it look like at mass adoption type thing. But we definitely will be looking to measure success and see what does that look like. Our philosophy is if you can't measure it, you can't talk about it in terms of knowing if it worked or not. And we can be a little metrics obsessed at times, but it's all a good thing. It's being able to get that data both quantitatively and qualitatively. There's a lot that sort of comes in through the hallway or through the channel or through places you weren't expecting it to, which is also kind of interesting. That helps very much drive that for us. So.
Yeah, we've actually seen a lot of customers launch some sort of a use case or workflow channel in which other employees share out cool ways that their team or that they're personally using Slack, so everybody can crowdsource those ideas. The great thing about measuring success, just like a vision statement, is you can actually do it at any time. So if you haven't done a robust survey assessment like Freya, that's totally fine. We threw some questions up here that will really help. And I think the key thing to remember is, again, tying it to those business goals that people understand why we're asking them to change behavior and adopt Slack within the organization. And then also, once you have those metrics, how do you report them out? Are you going to share them broadly with employees? Are you going to share them just up the chain with executives? But I think also having a baseline, and you talked about that as well. I do get asked, are there industry standards, best practices? And I think actually creating a baseline against your own company, every company is so unique and different, is a great way. You can see if those metrics are going up or if there's opportunities to tweak as well. And the last thing I'll add on measuring success is to keep an adaptive mindset. So of course, we're going to measure metrics over time, but your business is going to change. And so the metrics that you measure should change to reflect where your business is going. And I would also say that an adaptive mindset leads to our next one, which is creating an organized experience inside of Slack. We spend a lot of time talking to people about how to make sure Slack, as you scale, is still a productive environment for your employees as you go into that. And we've definitely found that having a thoughtfully designed approach to that, clear expectations, clear guidelines, goes a long way in ensuring that it feels like an organized, clean environment. So you've been on Slack for a while.
Yep.
How have you guys thought about this?
So when we were first starting our journey with Slack, I actually had reached out to a company that we talked to in the area, HubSpot. I don't know if Ben's here somewhere, but Ben was really helpful in giving us a lot of information about how to think about naming conventions, how to think about channel management, how to think about different items in terms of rolling it out and training materials. And so we actually created different training materials to help people set expectations about the naming conventions, what we wanted them to use, when we wanted them to use private versus public channels, when to use email versus Slack. So there's definitely times when you still want to use email. So we really put together a pretty robust set of documentation about all of this information. And I think that really helped us create a workspace that, while it's pretty, we've got 3,500 public channels, I think, so we've got a ton of channels. It doesn't feel too overwhelming to most people.
That's great. And how have you guys thought about it?
Yeah, our approach on this has been to follow the idea of fewer workspaces, more channels, and that's one of the big things that comes around for a variety of reasons. One is it helps, how do you organize, how do we help people work on that, because otherwise if you end up sprawled out too much, you lose sight of everything. I think that's one big piece of it for us. The second thing is we had an interesting challenge by virtue of the fact that so many people had built things up on their own beforehand that we had to kind of rein in as part of this. So we're actually a shade over 1,400 workspaces right now, which, if it sounds like a large number, it is. And so it's an ongoing thing for us, but it's probably my biggest headache of things that we're continuing to work through on that. Not because anything's wrong, but just because it's part of the evolutionary process. Is this idea of how do we get people from I organize myself this way to how we want them to organize themselves at large. Because you don't want to change what got you there in the first place, but at the same point, when you scale it up, there's a different element of control and naming conventions and number of workspaces and how do we set it up. And it's a strategic thing that has to get dealt with, and it's a tactical thing that has to get dealt with too as well. Because sitting in the engineering group and supporting the stack, it becomes that question too of people saying, hey, I can't find something runs slower. Obviously, the better you can organize those types of things up front, the better off you're going to be. And we still have a lot of work to do in that area. It's a bit of a journey for us. Plus, we also have to make sure that we're matching up with the different ways that people work within our organization. So that's kind of how we've approached it, is really saying, as few as possible at the workspace level, build out the channels, and then try and organize it. And we've been fairly successful so far, but there's a lot of work left to do for sure. And I say that for people because I think one of the things you realize is that putting it in place is one thing, and then the evolution of how you work with it over time. Because scaling is not just about number of people, it's about how you adopt it and what are the different use cases that you can find for something in the organization. And how you approach that has to be a little bit different.
Absolutely, and I would say it's more typical for us to come in when organizations have already been using Slack, and so they do have quite a few channels out there already. But I think the importance of naming conventions cannot be stressed enough, and that's really, it keeps it nice and organized on the left-hand side. People know if they're starting a new team channel, an announcement channel, perhaps a help channel, that there's a prefix or a convention to follow, and that really goes a long way to helping things with search and new team members coming on to keep that organized. Also, I think a feature not a lot of people know about is actually you can associate groups of channels with groups of users in Slack. So you could say, all of my sales team needs to be in these 10 channels, and that moment that a new employee starts or somebody transitions to sales, they're immediately dropped in those channels, and they can have access to all that information right away. And then I think also you guys talked about providing guidance to people around public and private channel usage. Every customer we work with has different expectations for how their employees should be using Slack. And so making that known, making that available is really helpful. And I don't know if you guys see where this is going, but if you do that, it'll hopefully be a very tidy workspace and bring not just your employees, but all of the admins in the room a lot of joy as they go through that. So I'm curious, are there any other strategies that you guys think about when you maintain a tidy workspace with your employees?
You want to?
Sure. So we actually have some things set up to archive channels when they haven't been used in, I think we use 90 days. So if there hasn't been any contributions, it just auto-archives the channel for us. And so that's one of the big things. The other thing we did is we set up documentation specifically for managers to set their own expectations and naming conventions for their teams. So a lot of the teams are going to have private channels or some channels that no one else cares about. And so we wanted to really empower everybody else in the organization to not only manage their own working in Slack, but also be the ones to tell everyone else if they're doing something that sort of doesn't follow our rules. So if someone's not threading a message and you want them to, it's okay for someone who isn't me to say, hey, you should probably put that in the thread. I don't want to be the Slack police. I don't have time to be the Slack police. So
we don't want that either.
Right. And so we've really tried to empower as many people as possible to go in and it's everybody's responsibility to keep Slack a productive place for us to be.
Right.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you mentioned, Freya, the importance of everybody in this, because that's one of the big things that at scale you have to really make sure that you're paying attention to, and it's this idea that the people in your organization can make or break your implementation. It's sort of a variation on the question that you usually hear when you talk to people. It's like, what keeps you up at night? For me, it's everybody in the organization, because I have no control over what they're going to do. And so that's one part of it. And so it's really an educational process of how we do it. And we've built up a team of digital coaches that work with our people. I've mentioned this a little bit earlier, but that's also very much part of the ongoing process about what does good practice look like? What does good Slack etiquette look like? Something I didn't think we'd necessarily have to do, but it's always an important thing to mention. So part of it is the education aspect of it, and then from the IT perspective, we're not into how we're dealing with old workspaces just yet, because we're still dealing with a lot of our consolidation type things. But I do envision that we're going to end up having to take a fairly similar approach, which is how to make sure that what you have there is relevant. and do it. Right now we're doing elements of it, but it's sort of manual based on what we see and how we get there. So we still have a little bit more, time, effort, things to put into that, but we're getting there on there.
That makes sense. And it brings us actually quite nicely to our last and final best practice, which you talked about education. And once you come up with these conventions and these guidelines around how you'd like people to use Slack, how do you actually get that knowledge out to all of the employees using Slack? So I'm curious, how did you guys decide to approach learning and enablement for your users as you scaled?
Yeah, we took the approach of meeting people where they are, and I think that's one of the big things. And I can claim no credit for this in our organization. This is another team that did some great things on it. We have web-based training. We use our digital coaches for in-person type things. We have built up communities so that people can go and try and help each other out. It started as a support thing for early adopters, and it's slowly developing into a self-help community that's a big part of that. There's obviously anything that we take within IT, we try and use as educational opportunities with knowledge-based articles, things like that. But really, we've taken very much a variety of different approaches there because it's about what people make of it. And because people are going to use it differently, they'll learn differently, they get enabled differently. So we took kind of a wider approach of meeting people where they are with it.
So we have also, put our documentation and training materials in a variety of places. We have it in our learning portal. We've done Slack days with our wonderful CSM. We try to talk to everybody. We also have a help Slack channel, which has basically become a crowdsourcing way for people to get help and to train each other. So there's questions that go in there all the time, and usually I don't need to respond at all. It's everyone else in the company. Like you said, it's everybody who is contributing to how to do it.
Absolutely. I think automation is key. You guys both kind of touched on automating. That's something that maybe doesn't need the work of humans, which is great. I think spreading that out to the masses, that it's scalable and not just on the shoulders of admins, is a fantastic best practice. I like that you talked about a manager guide. I usually hear things like Slack for sales, Slack for HR, but I love the idea of personalizing it to somebody's role so that they understand how they can get value. And then also kind of in product, and you mentioned applications, so in product training is a big thing that we're focused on as well. So I want to make sure everybody here knows they don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to learning and enablement. Slack has a lot of great resources for everyone to take advantage of. If you haven't heard about Slack Foundry, it's an app that you can install in any workspace, and it walks you through feature functionalities in the way of workflows. So a really quick way to get new employees up to speed as you expand or you launch Slack. The next is our help center. So I still Google things and it immediately pops up Slack help articles. I use it all the time. And I love that they're step-by-step. You can download them and share them out in PDF format. And then also one that not very many people know about, but we launched a Slack tips website. So slack.com/Slack tips. And that has more robust workflows and use cases. So if you're looking for more inspirational things, that's a great place to go. So we are closing up on time. Any last words of advice for anyone in the audience as they scale?
I would just say, talk to anyone you can. So there's plenty of people here at Frontiers to talk to. Get advice from people who've already gone through it. You can find me on LinkedIn if you need to, but I'm happy to talk to anybody. But that's really, I think, a huge help.
Yeah, and for us, it was a combination of things. One, I just want to swing back real quick and mention also a learning thing that I had kind of forgotten that I think is important, is we actually help kind of build up this idea of an interactive chatbot that could work with people on it. So it helps onboard people. It's, hi, welcome to BCG. Here's a lot that you can do with it, and it also serves as some help things. But in terms of, and that came as a result of one of the takeaway lessons I want to have here, which is ask more questions than you try and answer. I think that's really one of the biggest things, is we learned a lot throughout this process by listening to the people within our organization, because you're affecting fundamentally how people work. And you have a company culture that a lot of times you want to maintain, but then there's also individuals and how they work, and sometimes they are diametrically opposed to each other at times, and you have to kind of respect what both of those look like. So I would definitely say ask more questions than you answer on that one, and understand that it's a journey. It's not like you just flip a switch and off you go. It's something that is a process going forward, and if you find the right people around with you and you go through it that way, you have a much higher chance for success.
Well, we're at time, so we're going to bring Jen back out in a minute to close this out, but a huge warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you. Okay, great panel. I think that's always the best way to learn, is to see the journey that others have taken and get their best practices. But we always like to make sure that you have something you can leave with and look back on next week. You're getting a lot of information, so please take a picture. These are our key calls to action, and I think it'll be really helpful as you reflect on the week to pull this up and think about things that you can apply in your implementation. And then we also have feedback. Go to the app and share your feedback with us. We want to make sure that we're constantly improving and that these sessions are bringing value to the work that you do. You're spending a lot of valuable time here with us, and we want to make sure you get the most of it. Next up is lunch, so enjoy, and the product keynote this afternoon. And then make sure to see part 2 tomorrow that focuses on the features in Slack to help you scale. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your Frontiers.